Hello, this is Deborah Anderson, the Black Woman Animator, coming back to you with another video. And in this video, we have Stevon Lewis, who is a therapist, and I would like to give you the opportunity to give a little intro.
For sure. Thanks for having me on the show. Hi, everybody. I'm Stevon Lewis. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist practicing out of Los Angeles. I specialize in working with individuals struggling with imposter syndrome. So these are individuals that you and I would look at and say, hey, you know what, they're doing really well in life. But for whatever reason, they aren't able to connect to that success. So they always kind of go through life feeling like a fraud. And so in a lot of my work, I'm working with like entrepreneurs, Black folk, and just kind of, having them be more comfortable in their own skin and in the stuff that they do on a daily basis.
Wonderful. So my first question, very obviously, is can you define imposter syndrome?
For sure. So imposter syndrome, like I mentioned, is kind of a situation where people are getting the results in life, and for whatever reason, internally, they do not feel as though they are deserving of that stuff or that they had anything to do with it. So, you'll have someone who maybe has been elevated to the place of vice president or CEO of a company, and they constantly feel like they don't know what they're doing. And that at some point they live in fear that at some point they're going to be found out to not really have the skills or abilities that everybody thinks they have, which is completely untrue. But this is kind of a belief that they have. And so like when, I look at kind of this history and how I got into the kind of specializing with this population, you start to see kind of some common themes. Some of the stuff that you'll see is that, these individuals had a parent that was like super critical of them. So this parent was kind of always or very frequently commenting on where they weren't being successful and not really adding that other piece of where they were successful. And so they always felt like they were doing things wrong. The other thing that, I kind of find is that either they had to do something kind of amazing, right, to get some praise from parent. So it was like, you bring home good grades, well, that's what you're supposed to do, right? Like, you play ball and you score a certain amount of points, that's what you were supposed to do. But you had to do something like amazing, like graduate college, for them to be like, oh, wow, that's a really good accomplishment. It's like, well, those like once in a lifetime things. So the only time I'm really feeling like I'm accomplishing something or feeling good about myself is when I'm doing something really, really great. The other instances are like if somebody in your family or you're like the only one in your family to kind of achieve the success or have the success that you have. And you look around and you're like, yeah, my mom, barely graduated college or high school, or, my dad was incarcerated. And so you're looking around your family and you're saying, well, nobody's like me. I really, how did I get to this space of where it seems like I'm doing well in life and nobody else in my family is doing that? This can't be real. It must be luck or some other reason as to why I've gotten there. And then another big thing is like people kind of in majority white spaces. So when you think about Black, Indigenous people of color, kind of navigating majority white spaces, you're looking around the room and you're seeing a lot of people that don't look like you. And you're kind of questioning the fact of like, well, do I actually belong? Because no one in this room really looks like me. And so these are the things that kind of contribute to people feeling like a fraud or feeling like there are all these reasons, luck or chance or whatever that's created the opportunity for them to be successful as opposed to their own kind of abilities.
So I know that you specialize in this. How did you come to a point where you wanted to specialize in imposter syndrome?
So I had a bunch of clients and I was thinking about the clients that I really liked. And this was kind of the commonality that I felt like kind of came out of that. So these were the clients that, were presenting with these symptoms and we were getting some really good work done, right? Like we were getting them to overcome that stuff. And I was like, yo, man, like we're kicking ass in this. I'm feeling this. And, I kind of started doing a deep dive and said like, oh, wow, there's like actually a term for kind of what all these guys are going through. And, so let me kind of push or lean into that so that I get more of these types of clients to be able to support and assist.
Yeah, you were like, oh, they're
running. Yeah.
Oh, snap. I broke some ankles. Okay.
Here hey, man, we're a dynamic duo, we're out here killing it. Kobe the Shaq, baby.
All right. So a question I have, because, okay, so my question is, does imposter syndrome manifest in different ways? Because for me, I look at the surface of the definition and I think I don't have it because I'm just like, given any job, as long as it doesn't have like schooling, I can do anything. But
after learning more shit, I'll be all right.
But I'm wondering if there's any other ways that I may not recognize or other people might not recognize that they have imposter syndrome in other areas.
For sure, for sure. So that's funny. So yeah, I mean, I think if I give a little bit of history, like in terms of, like imposter syndrome and how it's founded. So it was discovered or coined. The term was coined by a lady named Dr. Pauline Clance out of the University of Georgia. And she's, was working in grad schools with women in grad school. And she kind of found that, like, even though these women were kind of performing really well, they still felt like they didn't belong. And so that was kind of one of the key components to being able to assess whether or not it's imposter syndrome, which, isn't kind of like a clinically defined term in the DSM, but also, people do suffer from it. And so, like, what she found is that, like, they weren't able to kind of really escape that fact that they didn't feel like they belong, even though they were getting, the results or whatnot. So kind of fast forward, you're talking about the problem, or I guess the kind of key signature factors, like people do not feel as though they have mastery over, or expertise in the area, even though they're getting the results and doing well, they're able to kind of explain it away to other things. And so, I guess the way what you're talking about is like, how does imposter syndrome kind of show up in other spaces outside of just work? Like, it can look like perfectionism. So, they have types of imposters, and, one of them is like the perfectionist, right? So this person has to do everything to a very high level, and it has to be absolutely perfect for it to count. Right? That otherwise, if there's any little flaw in it, it wasn't that good. And so they dwell on that piece of, like, they're more focused on the how than the what. And it's like, well, you accomplished this, why is that a big deal? Well, look how I did it. I didn't really, know what I was doing, or I didn't study enough. And it's like, but you still got a good grade. So what does it matter? But they hold on to that piece because everything wasn't in a row, right? And then, there's like other types of people who, individualists have to do things by themselves. And if anybody gets support, it kind of diminishes the fact that they had, the success, and they'll attribute it to, well, I had help from other people, so it's not really me.
Wow.
Yeah. So it's like, there's all these like kind of different types of people who kind of manifest themselves. Another one might be the expert. Someone who has to kind of read everything about a topic in order to feel confident that they know what they're talking about, or to be able to kind of say, okay, I know this now. And it's like, well, you mean to tell me you had to do all sorts of math? You had to take, quantum multivariate algebraic equations or some crazy stuff to be able to say, math now? Like, I don't know that that's necessary for you to feel confident and being able to say 2 + 2 is 4, right? But this is kind of how they operate. And so, yeah, it's just kind of that thing of where it shows up. It shows up kind of in the space of where you're actually doing well, but also kind of it can show up in other spaces and lead into, like, relationships or stuff like that, where you just don't feel confident, even though you're getting kind of good results in those spaces.
Yeah. I luckily a part of my natural personality is to constantly improve myself. But some things that I improve on, I'll just be like, I don't know how I did it, but I made a decision. But I do know how I was delivered from perfectionism for the most part. And so in 2016, I created a hashtag for the year called #action and execution, because I was the type of person who would read 50 articles about something and not do a damn thing because I had to do it perfectly the first time.
Yeah. So you got all this knowledge, and then everybody else is still smarter than you somehow.
Yeah. Or because sometimes, particularly being an artist, it's like people are like putting themselves out there and putting their art out there. And I'm like, I can do better than that, but I'm not doing no art, so don't nobody know I can do better than that.
Right.
And so it was about producing, just putting stuff out there. And so that helped me. That got me into like a repetition of, okay, it doesn't have to be perfect. I can put it out there. And so fast forward to 2020, we did a YouTube live a few weeks ago, Black Women in Animation, and on the flyer I put, because I tried to put the different time zones, so I put 12 p.m. PDT, and then it was supposed to be 3 p.m. CDT, but I put PDT again. And so somebody told me about it, and I was like, it's just a typo. Like, I didn't mean to do
it. Right. We'll survive that. It's okay. It doesn't really take away from the impact of what you did.
So I'm really happy that, I've come a long way. I still got a ways to go, but.
Right. Whereas in the past, you would have like ruminated over the fact that like you made that one simple typo because now nobody knows what time it is. Like, I don't think that's
right.
Nobody knows what time. I've ruined it.
People will figure it out. Like,
exactly. That's
hopefully.
Yeah, for sure.
So, my next question is: can our race, gender expression, sexual orientation, etc., exacerbate our imposter syndrome?
Absolutely, it can. Like I mentioned, that one of the kind of tenets that I see is the themes or whatever is that BIPOC people in majority white spaces, and so we're talking about also LGBTQ plus community being in kind of heteronormative spaces. That's going to definitely impact how comfortable and we feel or like how we fit in. And so when you think about getting these microaggressions, how that which are really kind of instances of racial trauma or sexual trauma or what have you, but those things are kind of sending a message to us that we don't belong. Right. And so then that can sometimes, if we aren't, as confident or as secure in our own abilities and what we do and what we bring to the table, then that can then tend to impact us and say, well, I don't know that I belong, or I've got to do a whole lot and live in this fear that like if I'm not perfect or if I'm not constantly producing or doing something amazing, then, I'm going to be out of here, or I don't, kind of fit in that sense. And I think that for sure, like if we're coming from marginalized populations or communities, then for sure we will not, feel as belonging or as though we do belong, or rightfully so in different spaces.
Yeah. So a personal story of like being a Black woman, like socialization, all these things of how I am the person I am. So at my last job, well, context is that people sometimes call me mean, but I think it's more because I'm direct. Like part of it is being direct, and then part of it is being, quiet, where people don't feel comfortable around quiet people, so they call them rude or mean.
Right.
And so that constant being called mean, like even I had a coworker at another job where at one time he was like, "Oh, Deborah, you're mean," and I'm like, "Okay, so have I ever been mean to you? No.
Right.
Have you ever seen me be mean to someone else? No. Then why are you calling me mean?" And he didn't even have an answer.
Right? It's like he asked for evidence. He
Right.
said, like, if this is true, then provide me with some evidence to show that this is actually the case.
Right. And so fast forward to my last, my last job, where I had a situation where one of my coworkers. So I feel like men who, whether they be married or not married, they test you out to see if they can go, and I don't give any signals. So so he kind of so he kind of blew by the signals I never gave him to make him comfortable enough to like make a comment. So we went out to lunch, and he was just like, "Oh, Deborah," because I was about to leave, so I guess he had to express something, and he's like, "Oh man, you fine." I'm like, "You don't have to say that." And he's like, "No, yes, I do." So I kind of, mini advocated for myself in making that comment. But then after he kind of proceeded, I didn't do anything. And so I kind of ruminated over that my entire weekend, and was pissed because other people telling me I'm mean made me not advocate for myself in a situation where I needed to advocate for myself.
Right. Look at that. So that like in an instance where it's appropriate for you to be you, and how you would have normally dealt with it, now you're kind of refraining and taking back. It's kind of like how we were joking before we got started recording about like code switching, the fact that I'm doing these things to make this other person comfortable, right? Like me being me is too much. I mean, it's so different from how I guess some of my experience of being a Black male, in America, it has its own kind of threats and concerns. So that like when I leave my house, I am am I smiling enough? Like I smile a lot anyway, just because I'm a happy guy. But being conscious of that, like when I come into a room, make sure I'm smiling, because I don't want to be perceived as a threat. Like that's going to have any impact on that, because people don't know, what level of education does Stevon bring into this space? Because as a Black man, and I'm a big Black man, I'm about 6'2.5", about 250. So size wise, like I'm a pretty good size figure. So people already have this narrative in their head about Black men in general, and then big Black man. So it's like I've got to be on stage or on point all the time, so to speak, and prepared. And so it's like can I get angry? because what is that really going to mean for me and myself, right? And so I think you're kind of having that same experience, and that's kind of what happens with people for, kind of struggling, like, I guess with imposter syndrome a bit, is like, am I able to, is it me? Like, can I just be me and that be okay? And like their belief that no, it's not.
Right. And so I felt like that was an instance where your desire to make a comment about me is more important than my comfort. And then I told a couple people about it, and they were like, oh, maybe go to HR. But then being a Black woman in America, I'm thinking like, oh, well, this is a Black man, and I'm about to leave, so this is the South, so like
look
all
at all
these
that
things.
Responsibility you took on in that situation, right? Like you've got to take care of yourself and this other person that offended you.
Right.
That's a lot of pressure. Yeah, exactly. That you're now responsible for also your own emotions and feelings, and also the person who was kind of I guess offensive to you. You got to take care of that person now as well. And it's like, well, wait, you got to attend to both sides.
Right. So my next question: as an artist, not only do you look at other people's art to draw inspiration, but looking at other people's art can also cause a bit of envy. So what is something for creatives to keep in mind as they're forging their own path?
Right. So you bring up a really good point. I have a friend who's an actor, and so he talks about like, you've got to be okay with rejection to be an actor, right? Like to be successful, you got to be okay with rejection, because what people are saying is it's not about you didn't have the skills. It's something about you that doesn't fit the role, right? And I guess I kind of pushed back against that. I was like, well, it depends on kind of who's hiring for what job, right? Because maybe it's about them and their ability to see that, like, talent or whatever, however it's written, doesn't have to have this person, right? But like, guess when you're art, it's that twofold thing of where you're putting out something that's personal to you, and you're now being judged on that based on how you compare to other people that do this same thing. And that's a tough space to be in, right? Because oftentimes when we're getting critiqued, it's not getting critiqued to say, this is good and really fantastic. It's, well, this didn't accomplish this one thing. I don't know if they got to this space. And so, when you're talking about high achievers or people who are gifted and talented, which I feel like artists are, that, they're going to be hard on themselves. And so they're looking at themselves and they're, I guess kind of consistently downgrading their own abilities or what they put out compared to other people. I used to be the director of counseling services at a small private college in Burbank called Woodbury University, and they have like a big animation program, right? And so these guys will come in and like they'll the students will come in and they'll say, oh, well, she's so much better than me, or this other person's really good. And it's like, well, you're also in the program and you're getting good grades, and your work is getting into film festivals or whatnot. It's getting submitted. Why are you kind of downgrading what you're putting out next to the next person, right? And it's like, well, if it wasn't the best thing there, like the best submission, then it's trash. And it's like, that black or white thinking, all or nothing, that dichotomous thinking isn't really helpful in those situations. But that's what we do. We go through life, and a lot of like social media and stuff kind of created this space of where everyone's being judged against everyone else. And so they're constantly looking for how they don't fit or how they aren't measuring up to the people around them, which is a tough thing for, I think, artists.
Yeah, I'm thankful to be in the older range of millennials, and people likes don't mean nothing to me. And so
how did you stay out of that? Likes mean nothing to you? How did you avoid getting that?
Like on YouTube, my subscriber count, the only reason I even paid attention to it, because on YouTube, like once you reach 1,000 more, you get more access and you can monetize. So that's the only reason I care. But other than that, I just be like, I'll grow it eventually.
Yeah, it'll do what it's supposed to do. Unbothered. Unbothered at all.
Yeah, sometimes I'm on YouTube and look at the comments, and you can tell like the person made a comment and then a lot of people like it, and then they like go back and edit it like, oh my gosh, a lot of people liked it, thank you. And I'm just like, it's not that serious.
Right.
Like you just said a sentence and people was like, oh, I agree.
Yeah.
But they think they're like celebrities or something.
Exactly. But it's one of those things of like, now that defines me in a positive way. And if I'm not getting that anywhere else, then I'm looking for it. I'm looking for something that tells me that I'm okay.
Yeah. So let's see. The next question. There's artists that have the eyes of a lot of people, and others look up to them, but they still question themselves, their skill set, and their work. How can they push through these thoughts?
Mm-hmm. So the way I do it, and that's why I kind of commented on the fact that you asked that person for evidence, is when I'm doing therapy with someone, like I'm constantly getting them to be aware of their thinking, right? Because I believe that what we think impacts how we feel, and that impacts what we do. That our thoughts influence our emotions, and our emotions then influence our behavior. And so I'm constantly making people aware of their thinking. So like getting them to engage in that metacognition, thinking about thinking. And so the way it kind of works is that, if we all have an inner bully, right? We have this kind of inner bully inside of us that kind of feeds off of like our insecurities and tries to get us to, feel bad or terrible about ourselves or not be as confident as we could be. Because it's just like a regular bully, right? To beat you up, just kind of like that individual who was offensive to you was doing something that didn't make you feel good, right? That's what your inner bully wants to do. And so what you did was ask for data. And so I get people to say, like, well, where's the evidence? Like, if you can just ask your inner bully, where's the evidence that what you're doing isn't as good, or what you're putting out isn't of quality, or, of substance, then okay, I'll believe it, right? And so I think, like you said, is that we get under this pressure, and people tell themselves that, like, I've always have to be doing X, Y, and Z, or if I ascend to this level, then I've got to maintain that level. And people with imposter syndrome frequently fear getting promotions or getting elevated higher, because now they say, well, now it's more pressure on me to pretend or have to find a way to fake it that I have what I don't have, as opposed to living in the truth that they do have it, right? And when I ask, like, hey, well, provide me the evidence because I don't see it. So, I want to see what you see. So just show me the data that suggests that you don't know what you're doing. And so I would say for like those individuals who are artists who are, feeling like pressure to, put out great quality work all the time. I'm saying, is that pressure real? Because it sounds like your work is just good as is, right? Like you're creating good work. So then why wouldn't you continue to create good work? Like, unless there's something they know about themselves that, oh, well, that's the last good thing I'm going to produce. Everything else from here on out is going to be shit. And it's like, well, tell me what that is so that I can understand it. Because otherwise, if you've been doing it, why wouldn't you continue?
Right. I know I read a book by Jen Sincero, and she said like worrying is praying for something bad to happen or something like that.
Yeah. Albert Ellis says anxiety is a crisis of the imagination. Yep. That like we're in fear or living in fear or responding to the world or the future as though we know and predicted that this bad thing is going to happen, when in actuality, none of that stuff's happened.
And so when you're worrying or thinking about something bad happen, it's like you're going through that trauma twice, like, or possibly, because if it does happen, then you have to go through it again. But if it never happens, you only go through it once.
Yep. That you put yourself in a state of kind of hypervigilance and worry and, anxiety when you maybe didn't even need to. And it's like, well, what's the evidence that, like, unless you can tell the future, then how do you know it's going to go terribly? I'm open to being convinced. I don't think that, my way of thinking is the only one that's right. I'm just saying I like the scientific method also. I believe in science. So show me some evidence or give me some data to suggest that that's going to be happening. And if you can read tell the future, then, let me get those lottery numbers, player. I need to something happen with that. We could all win.
Right. Let us eat.
That's what I'm saying. I'm trying to eat. I can eat good too. If you tell me those lottery numbers on today, I'll play them tomorrow. We'll be straight.
Right. And as you were talking about the power of thinking, something I want to tell like the audience is, for me, one area where I do that I feel maybe very well is, you have your mountaintops and your valleys. And for me, during my valleys, I'm not one of those people who are like, oh God, why me? I'm just like, okay, I'm going through this because something about to happen in the future where this is preparing me. I would really like to know what that is, particularly on how long I'm in a valley. I'd be like, man,
that's a really positive way of thinking. I like that.
Like in the past couple of years, like I was like I had some leadership positions, so I was like, man, guy, you are preparing me for something awesome because I'm going through it. Right. So I would like to communicate that to people, where I kind of change how I think about my bad times and was like, man, this is preparing me for something, and I can't wait for hindsight to be 2020 because I'm just like, why am I going through this?
Glass full. I love it. Yeah, but no, that's a real thing of like, taking an assessment of your situation and like, how do you think about that? And so I think oftentimes people will get in the valley and they only see the valley, right? They don't see the way out, or the fact that like, it's more of a not in the moment type thing, right? Like, because if you go kind of with the ups and downs of life, you'll be all over the map. Life will be a roller coaster. And so what I try to do is tell my clients to kind of look at life as though it's more of like the stock market, right? Is that, there are ups and downs, right, going all the time. If you looked at your stocks every day, you're like, oh, I'm up today and I'm down tomorrow. And it's like you'd be all over the map where I was up today and later that afternoon I'm down. But look at the trend line, like, right, like where is it really going? And if it's trending upward, then you're doing just fine. That the ups and downs don't really mean anything if you're still going in a high direction.
Yeah. What do you say to creatives that feel they get did we already talk about? Well, I'm gonna ask it anyway. What do you say to creatives that feel they get opportunities that they don't deserve? So wanting to pay these imaginary dues that they created in their mind.
Right. And that's, I think, kind of that negotiation that we'll make with ourselves because we don't feel deserving of stuff that happens to us. And so then we'll start to kind of say, well, I have to then be amazing. I have to be great. I have to accomplish this thing. So unless I'm, president of this organization, or, I'm on TV for being a therapist or whatever, then I didn't really, do it. Or I have to help everybody that comes in now because, I wasn't really even supposed to make it into grad school and even become a therapist because nobody else in my family even went to college. And, again, that's arbitrary, right? Like there's no law that says that you have to now do amazing and, grandiose things or accomplishments to prove that you are deserving of what you've been given, right? That like your skill set and what you bring to the table as is got you to the place that you are now. And I'm sure, you've had like support from other people along the way and encouragement and things like that. But I don't know that you're now indebted to those folks or those opportunities to now have to repay this debt. So, it's not a quid pro quo here. It's not like, well, I got this, so I have to do that. And so I want people to kind of, be confident that like, hey, you got something, or, somebody assisted you, but also you brought something to the table. Because I guess the way I think of it is like, if I provide you an opportunity, I can teach, with my clients, like, I tell them that like, it's more of like working out or whatnot, as opposed to kind of therapy. So that like, if I'm a trainer and I teach you these exercises, we get a good workout when we're in session together, what are you doing outside of session, right? Like, are you doing cardio? Are you eating right? Are you doing those things? If I give you homework and you aren't practicing any of the tools and stuff that we learned in therapy, I can't say then that, you didn't do well or whatever. So that like you're doing things outside of therapy. And so if your life gets better, it's because you applied the stuff I taught you, right? So then you have to take ownership over that. That wasn't Stevon, that was you.
Another thing I'm thinking of, going back to acting or even, comedy or something like that, where if you watch like a bunch of interviews and people will say, well, whether they just tell their story or they say, oh, you have to do this for like 10 years, or I did this for 10 years and And if you're like a beginning actor and you get that one role and you just immediately become famous and you feel like, oh, well, I didn't pay my dues, so I don't deserve this fame or something like that.
Yeah, that goes back to that comparison piece, right? That like my journey needs to mirror the next person's journey, right? And so, I try to tell people, or, I use analogies a bunch if you can't tell when I do therapy. And so I use the analogy of like of James Harden versus Russell Westbrook, right? And so like the way they play is different. I love sports. So, I mean, I grew up playing basketball or whatever. So sports just, makes sense and people can identify with that stuff. But Russell Westbrook is like, Energizer Bunny. He's up and down the court. He's all over the place. He's getting a rebound, went in and dunking on somebody the other end, or taking a shot and getting a steal. James Harden, not so much. But very effective and very, like, they're both all-stars because they have good game, right? And they're good at playing the sport of basketball. People can debate on, how well James Harden plays defense or whatever. We won't go there. Still made it to the all-star team, so everybody relax. I'm not a player. Brother got talent. But the thing is, though, is that like they played two different styles of basketball, both effective, right? And so I'm saying, like, James Harden shouldn't go around thinking less of himself or thinking that, he's not deserving of being an all-star because his game isn't like Russell Westbrook's, and vice versa. Like Russell Westbrook should be like, man, I have to do a lot of hard work to be able to, get this. And so like the way I label it is like, a low investment, high return player versus a high investment, high return. And Russell Westbrook is high investment, high return. James Harden is low investment, high return. And that's okay. You know, it's okay to play that way and you can be really good, and you don't need to kind of feel bad or think that yours needs to look like somebody else. And I think that oftentimes people will get in spaces where they're comparing themselves to other people and saying my journey or how I do stuff or how I create my art isn't like that. Or, you know, I mean, if somebody's like musically talented and they don't read music, and it's like, but do you play good music? You know, like, at the end of the day, I don't know that, you know, you need to know all this stuff. Do you make good music? I think at the end of the day, that's what people are going to care about, whether or not you knew how to write music or can read it. I don't know.
And I feel like we're giving people credit for noticing things more than others. Like I remember in college, I was doing this this dance, like it was two couples and it was like bachata or something like that. And somebody had dropped out, so they was like, Deborah, come do this. I was like, oh, okay, I guess. And so the whole routine, we were supposed to be in sync the whole time. And there was this like, because I was learning it so quick, there was this like under the arm move where I always got messed up. And so I obviously messed up on stage, but nobody noticed. And I'm like, but we're all in sync the whole time. Don't you notice that we're not in sync anymore? But nope, nobody was like, oh, okay, I guess.
Yeah, I think that happens frequently, right? Like for us, it's a huge mistake, or, you know, it has this huge kind of vision of this impact, and it's so big, and, you know, no, people can't see it. I mean, everybody's gonna see it, and it's like, well, nah, people don't really notice because, again, it didn't take away from the impact. And I think people are focusing on the how and not the what. Like, how did we all stay in sync forever the whole time, or did we get off for a second and then get back on sync? As opposed to like, hey, was the performance enjoyable and good? Did people have a good time watching what you guys did? And if that happened, then it doesn't matter that, you know, I forgot a line, or that, you know, this is a little bit askew or whatever. You know, was the film good? Was it good?
Right. And I was watching the YouTube channel Terrell Grice, and he was interviewing Stevie Mackey, who's a song coach. And he's worked with J-Lo or whatever. And something profound, yeah, he is. Something profound he said was, you know, if you're thinking about a Picasso or Michelangelo or something like that, and even in music or whatever, there's these things we deem as masterpieces. But if we stood next to that person, they could tell you every mistake.
100%.
But we think of it as a masterpiece, but they're like, oh, I didn't mean to do that. I had to cover that up. And it's just like, wow, but it's still a masterpiece to us.
Right. I remember watching, it was Stevie Wonder on YouTube, and he was going back over a song or playing some songs or whatever, and he had somebody in the studio with him. And so he was like, oh man, did you hear that? And the person's like, hear what? And so he went back and he did like all this stuff to the machine and like isolated the sounds. And like there was one piano key that he messed up on. And he's like, I never heard that until right now. Like, I messed that up. It's like, nobody heard that. Like, and look at how much isolation you had to do. And it was a famous song. It might have been like, you know, one of his favorite.
Ribbons in the Sky.
Yeah, it could have been like Ribbons in the Sky or something like that, right? And like, so, you know, he's like, man, like, messed up the wrong key. And it's like, yeah, but all these years, and that's like when all these years, like nobody cares that key. They didn't even hear that key. You didn't even hear it until right now. And to hear it, you had to isolate all these other sounds and take it away to be able to even notice it. And it's like, yeah, it's so unnoticeable and had no impact on how good the song was. So it's like, let it go, Steve. It's all right.
Right. Sometimes we elevate the small percentage of naysayers over the larger percentage of fans of our work. What causes us to do that, and how can we work to change the desire to make negativity the star of the show?
For sure. And so it's kind of like a psychological term that's called kind of confirmation bias, right? So that if you're thinking about someone who struggles with imposter syndrome, they already see themselves as being a fraud, right? So they think that they don't belong, and they don't have the skills or abilities to be able to do the thing they're doing. And so they're looking for information to confirm that, right? And so they're filtering out anything that's, you know, anti that kind of narrative, and they're only letting in information that supports that narrative. So what they'll do is they'll minimize information that suggests that, no, you do belong and you really do have the skills and the talent and abilities, and then they will, you know, allow in and adhere to or accept, you know, wholly evidence to suggest that maybe they made a mistake, or that they don't, you know, actually have the skills or abilities. So yeah, it's that kind of confirmation bias, or seeking out and only allowing certain information in, like ignoring the positive and you know, attaching to the negative, that causes people to kind of continue to feel worse about themselves, right? And so it's like, if it fits my narrative that I already have about myself, then it must be true. And I'm like, well, what about all this other evidence, that you ignore? You ignore and don't want to kind of, allow in to change your narrative. And so really getting people to say like, hey, the narrative you have about yourself, you need to be aware of that. What are your core beliefs about who you are? And so we got to start chipping away at that stuff kind of in treatment.
And I feel like the power of response in some cases is monumental, because I watched several like people on YouTube and some comedians on Instagram. And there was like one particular comedian that was like going live a lot at the beginning of the pandemic. And he would question like why are some of these people making some negative comments, and in the YouTubers and the comedians, is like, because you keep responding to them. So it's like
you're giving them life, huh?
Right. So, for people who, I don't know what these people do, who are not true to themselves, where if they're providing positive comments and then they notice that the person is responding in negative, and then they switch and do the negative. And that's why sometimes when the person will call them out, they'll be like, oh, I'm a huge fan. Like, why did you just come to me with negativity?
Right.
But because they wanted that attention, and you only respond to negative. So that's their strategy.
Yeah, that's like a behavioral pattern, right? And so like you'll see that cycle happen oftentimes with like adolescents for kids, where parents don't really comment or show a lot of attention when they're doing what they're supposed to be doing, right? Supposed to. But then like when they're getting in trouble, that's when parent comes in and shows all the support or nurturing, or is like focused on them and involved in their life. And so the message they're getting is that, well, I need to do these things in order for this person to kind of connect in the way that I want. Like whether it's bad or good, the thing I had to do to get it, it's the connection I want. So if you're only going to pay attention to me when I'm bad, and I want you to pay attention to me, then I'll just be bad, right? And I'm not saying it makes sense, but I'm saying like behaviorally, it's just that's kind of how behavioral work is that it's just a response to a stimulus. And so that's kind of what's happening in those comments. And then people are like, well, people are being mean to me. It's like, well, if you don't interact with that or engage that, you aren't sending a message that this is what bothers you, or how to get interaction with you.
And I saw one YouTube video where the guy was saying, when he was a musician, and he said that when people commented negatively, he only responded in positivity, and he converted fans that way because of that.
No, I mean, it's important. Like you get to spin the narrative and see how you want to respond or react to things. Like we can't control the behavior of others. So again, in the style of therapy I do, rational motive behavior therapy, events are events, right? And it's how we respond or how we choose to interpret those is what gives them life or meaning, right? What we tell ourselves about that stuff. So, if somebody says, Stevon, you suck as a therapist, I can feel bad about that if I say, well, that person's opinion matters. And I do really think I suck as a therapist. How did they find out? And now I feel like a piece of shit, right? Whereas like I could say, hey, well, that person doesn't know anything about me. I've never done therapy with them, so who really cares? And also I have all these other clients that continue to pay me and come to therapy. And I've had them for, some for over a year, some for a couple years. And we do good work and we're making tons of progress in their life and they're feeling better about it. So then that one comment doesn't matter, right? But it's more what I do with that information, because people can do whatever they want. How I respond to it or what I allow that to do is up to me.
How can we embrace the value we bring and produce in our lives and careers?
So you mean like bringing, how we can embrace that we bring to like the spaces we're operating in, or just in general, the spaces we're operating in?
In both.
All of the above, both and.
Right.
Well, I mean, I guess it's the same for both, so it doesn't really make a difference. I think we've got to see ourselves for who we are, right? That like, we all have value and purpose as being human beings. And that, we aren't really defined by our accomplishments. Because again, no one's perfect. No one's always producing or doing anything amazing and fantastic. That, even Michael Jordan had bad games, or Kobe Bryant did too, right? Like nobody's always playing at a high level, or, neither of those guys made every buzzer beater, but you still want to give them the ball at the end of the game. And it's more of, kind of evaluating yourself kind of over time as opposed to in every instance of every day, right? So give yourself some freedom of like, hey, have I done more positive than good? And so, I give like worksheets. I have one that says putting thoughts on trial. And so, it forces you to say, here's what your thought is, and here's, evidence to support and evidence against. And for you to kind of evaluate like whether or not like, well, what has more in it? What's more true? And so oftentimes what you'll find after kind of completing that exercise is that in actuality, there's the negative stuff I'm believing out myself, it's less than, but I'm giving it more weight. And so then, kind of retraining yourself to say, I don't need to give more credence to that stuff, that I can just be myself and know that I'm okay because I'm actually putting out more positive than negative, right? Another tool I'll do or activity is like, I call it collecting data. And so I'll have people ask, 4 or 5 friends and family, like a mix of people, to list their top 5 strengths. And out of that, then you kind of find out, well, here's what I'm putting out to the world, to different people, and this is kind of what they're getting. And so then it paints a better picture of who you are. So even despite, you feel like, well, I'm not really that nice or whatever. Well, all these people feel like you are. So you tell me which is it? Like, are they all wrong or are you wrong? And so we've got to kind of combat that in that moment.
Yeah. Let's see. Okay, what's a positive spin on taking risks that can make us more comfortable with taking them, and how can we reframe the idea of failure?
For sure. So that like 2 things. I remember reading the book Think and Grow Rich.
I love that book.
Yeah, it talks about Henry Ford, right? And like how, when the Model T came out, he had tried a whole bunch of models before that. Like I told myself growing up, like, oh, the Model T is just the first one. No, it's the first one that actually worked the way he wanted it to. So there was a Model A all the way up to T. So it's like thinking about that, and it's like, oh shit, like he failed a bunch before he actually got one that worked, right? And that there's learning that comes from not being successful initially, right? Like we learned what didn't work, so that puts us closer to figuring out what might. But also, I think kind of in taking risk is that, I have a belief that we don't grow from a place of comfort. So that for us to kind of level up or be better, we've got to get out of our comfort zone. So, I mean, I take it back to things that are tangible. So like if I'm lifting weights, if I want to lift more weight, then I can't continue to lift the same amount of weight and expect to get stronger, right? I will get strong to a point, but if I want to lift heavier weights, I've got to put on heavier weights. And that's going to be uncomfortable because I'm going to struggle, I'm going to strain, but that's how you get better. And so I think people have to be okay or learn to be comfortable with the idea or have this expectation that, hey, there might be some unpleasantness. That doesn't mean it will be, but there can be, but there probably may be some discomfort in you growing and learning something new, but also recognizing that that's not a bad thing. We don't have to label that negatively, that, it's just a part of the process, so to speak.
Yeah, I know for adult learning, a huge part of it is unlearning and then learning. So that's what made adult learning so hard as compared to child learning. I learned.
Yeah, because over all these years, you've developed these practices and habits, and they become part of you. And like you've got to get rid of some of those because they become barriers. It's one of those things where I have the adage that I tell is that people change when it becomes too uncomfortable to remain the same. And so when we run up against roadblocks and we aren't able to kind of continue along in the path that we wanted to be on by doing things the way we needed to do, then we have to take a detour or we got to switch stuff up. But, just behaviorally, people don't tend to do that as long as it's working. It's if it ain't fixed, don't broke, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Sometimes we need to fix it before it's all the way broken. Like maybe we don't wait until it's actually broke to do something about it.
Yeah, and one of my favorite Thomas Edison quotes is, "I have not failed. I have just found 10,000 ways that don't work." And that was in response to the filament for the light bulb. And I was like, yeah, gotta reframe.
Exactly. Because I mean, had he not had that thought process, we all be in the dark still. Huh?
And then to go back to the Think and Grow Rich, when I read that book, I learned more about the practical ways to practice faith, because it is a secular book, but I like the chapter on faith. I learned how to practice faith more than any, like being in church my whole life, having a mother as a minister. Like I was just like, wow, this is how you practically do it, because I'm a practical person. So it's just like, oh, okay, that's how you practice faith.
Yeah,
like actively.
Absolutely, absolutely. It's sort of like what's the other book by Koalo? Is it the Alchemist?
Yeah.
Yeah. It's similar to that in the sense of like you're learning that, hey, look, we might not know or have everything figured out in the moment, but hey, stuff goes the way it's supposed to go for us. And I think that that's mostly true, for people's lives. That like, I mean, sure, do we endure some unpleasantness or hardships at times? Absolutely. There's a bunch of stuff that happened to people that I wish never happened and shouldn't happen. And I don't even like to use should as a demand word, right? But no, it's like shouldn't, like that just shit's not fair. But and also that like, what, out of that, like people become who they are as a result of these things. And so saying like you're a person and you have value and stuff because of that. Yep.
So this question is because in the animation industry, and I'm sure in multiple like art industries, but particularly in the animation industry, I feel like a lot of people who are drawn to it are sometimes seen as the outcast, because there's a group of people who are like, oh, we were nerds or we were weird, and you escaped through anime or animation in some way. And so
they define themselves as that, you're saying? Like they say I'm weird or people do?
Well, there's various circles where weird is like a reclaimed word. So it depends on the person.
So
But
it becomes less of a slur and more of like a, term of endearment.
yeah. So how can we revel in our differences rather than feel like an outcast because of them?
Right. And so I think part of that again is about how you see yourself, of that, being in homogenous kind of spaces where everybody's the same. Research even shows that like, diversity creates a higher way of like thinking, or, a wealthier experience in life and just kind of in solutions. And that like when you have homogenous groups try to solve a problem, like they get to the problem solution faster, but like they don't have as creative ways to solve that problem. So it just becomes this one kind of way to do it. And that's how we get through, which if that doesn't work, then they're going to be screwed. Whereas like if you have a more diverse or, population, then those people will come up with a varied or variety of different, ways to solve said problem. And so I think saying like, hey, you know what, me being me adds value, it doesn't really take away, right? That like, there is something to the way I think, the way I interact, and it might not be like how everybody else does, but also, I don't know that it's absolutely wrong. I think that the way I kind of define it is if I'm not taking away from somebody else, or I'm not kind of negatively impacting somebody else's life, then why does it matter how I behave or how I operate, right? That like I'm not preventing you from eating by the way I eat, or I'm not preventing you from living and being successful by the way that I go about, living and being successful. So then, let's kind of step away from the fact that like I need to look like you or look like how you operate and feel outside of that. But it's tough because, we are, as a species, I think people who want to kind of fit in, we want to look right. And there's that groupthink, right? That like, well, most people do it this way. That doesn't mean it's necessarily right, but what we do is we attach it to that. And some of that comes like out of that, white supremacy kind of, conceptualization. And I don't mean like just white supremacy, but like that whiteness or Westernness is the right or correct way to do things. And so, that doesn't adhere or like, fit to how we are in our own ethnicity or culturally, then that's going to be an impact we're going to feel different from.
Yeah, something I've been thinking about over the past, several years is the idea, particularly since I lived in South Korea, is this idea of civilized, and why, like, if you think of colonization and like, why is someone who lives in a hut or is half naked, why is that not civilized?
Right. But again, that's the white supremacy of it all, right? That like, Westernness or white culture is the standard by which all is measured in terms of correctness and appropriateness. And if you don't fit into that, then you're doing something wrong, which, is why corporate America is all screwed up, because it operates on those kind of tenets, right? And so, when we come into spaces, or people from, other places come into these spaces and they don't kind of fit in the way they operate, or, just culturally, those things are different. Like, you don't culturally, individualism, or, in black culture, like that's not the way to operate. Like, we think about family, we are collectivists, like that's how we move. And so that's not rewarded in these other spaces. And so, we don't kind of fit in there, and it's like we won't be as successful, or it's more difficult to be successful, or we get, our behavior is interpreted, or downgraded as a result of those sorts of things.
Yeah, and as I'm thinking of, Blackness in animation, and creating our own, as we create our own animation studios or whatever, I think about not doing it how they do it, like infusing our Africanness and Blackness into how we do things, and not doing it the corporate way, which is sometimes the white supremacy way, or the norm, and like taking what we bring to the table and kind of flipping it and then applying it to what we create on our own. Because I feel like Black people in any space, when we're trying to create our own, we still do it just like them.
Yeah. I mean, it's socialized, right? Like, I mean, you get deemed if you don't. And so it's one of those things of like, do I want to, be cast out and not have opportunity, or do I want to kind of grow? And it's like, well, you got to morph or conform to some degree to be able to be successful. And that's not just when we get into the corporate space. It starts out in education, right? Like, the way we are to behave in classrooms and stuff is not based off of like what's the most, healthy environment for us to be able to learn or whatever. It's because this person said you have to act and look and be this way in this space. And, if you aren't, you're going to get downgraded, or you're going to get, put in a special education class or what have you, even though, I'm able to learn or, do well while I have, TV on or whatever. It has to be silent. It has to be these things. And so it's like, I didn't create those rules, but I have to adhere to them.
Yeah. And something you said earlier made me think of, and I'm sure like therapists and people in the social sciences think more about this than, other people. But we have, in our societies all around the world, we have this like attachment to, technological advances. But I'd be like, but what about human updates? Like, why are we not trying to become better humans?
Yeah,
and
it
is around this idea that I have where like, aliens ain't never gonna come here because we just the ghetto.
hey, legit, right? Like, I'm not coming to visit y'all. Look at y'all cut up way too much. Absolutely not. And you're right. Like, we are trying to innovate and create new and grander ideas, and in ourselves, we aren't trying to be better. We're still operating, especially in this country, like, off the same document. Like, we haven't updated that document to be more reflective of the population of this country in, hundreds of years now. And, wondering why, like, hey, we're starting to fall behind, is because, well, we haven't done anything to be more reflective and inclusive of what this country has become. Right. And so it's like, that space of, again, of, you got to get uncomfortable to grow and change, or, things have to be, untenable before you start to, switch shit up. And I think that's kind of the climate we're in now.
Yeah.
But I love that, though. Like, we should be upgrading our human selves.
Yeah, like I made a Facebook status about it, but people didn't get it because they thought I was talking about like androids or something, like adding technology. I was like, no, becoming better people, like updating to our humanness. I was like, okay.
Biotic, man. You're gonna put on like the Black Panther suit and now you like, relax, bro. That's not what we're talking about.
I was like, well, I tried, whatever.
Right.
Okay, so there's a good amount of people in the art and animation industry with social anxiety. What are the causes of social anxiety, and how can artists deal with that?
Yeah, sure. So social anxiety is, I guess, what you're kind of alluding to is what we call generalized anxiety disorder, right? Which social anxiety could be a part of, and social anxiety has this thing, but it's kind of being out in this fear of being judged negatively when you're out in a public space, right? And so I think, why artists struggle with that is because they're putting themselves out there when they put their art in a public space. That if someone doesn't identify or connect with their art, they're saying, I don't identify and connect with you, right? You're putting a piece of you. And so it's hard to separate yourself from that thing you do. Whereas, like, part of me and part of who I am is a therapist. but that's not the only thing I am. Whereas like, you know, when you're an artist, you're saying my art is me, right? And I'm putting out things that not because I thought, you know, what will Stevon like or what will Deborah like? It's more of, hey, this was my thing and I enjoyed it. And I think and hope that you'll like it too, but it's a part of me. And then when people reject that or it's not received in the way that you want it, then it starts to hurt a little bit more. And so you'll get a little bit more nervous about going out because you're telling yourself, I'm probably going to be judged or critiqued negatively if I go out into public spaces. And so people will start to be a little bit anxious socially or to show parts of themselves or be vulnerable because maybe they, you know, maybe it's out of actual, you know, instances when they've been rejected and not just kind of felt good. Or sometimes it's kind of, you know, imagined where, you know, they tell themselves, people, I saw this other person get, you know, reamed or whatever for their stuff. And so, you know, now I'm not going to try to put mine up. It's kind of like, you know, if I'm at the Apollo and I just saw the Sandman come and take the person off in front of me, am I going to go out there now? It's like, nah, Sandman kick people off. They're not going to feel what I was doing, right? It's like, nah, get out there. Just because that was that person's experience doesn't mean it's yours.
Yeah, when I initially moved to Los Angeles in February, I would be reaching out to different people, but also in the back of my mind, I'm like giving people grace because I understand, you know, me randomly reaching out to them might cause social anxiety for them. And so they're not necessarily not responding because they're mean or because they think they're better than me, but it could be like, this is kind of, I don't like this. So I was giving people grace for if I like hit them up and they didn't respond. I was like, okay, but in my industry, you know, that person might have anxiety. And then I've seen something recently on Twitter where, because there was this Twitter thing where there was a hashtag like nobody artist or something like that, where it was like people under 10,000 likes or something, and they created a hashtag and like, oh, so they can get more likes. But then I saw some of my artists, people I follow, they were like, oh man, I don't even want more followers because that will increase my anxiety. And I was like, oh, that's an interesting concept of like the internet causing that anxiety.
Yeah, like it's the one musician, I forget her name, where she's got
No Name.
Is that her? And she struggles with like extreme things, like she doesn't want to perform. Like
Summer Walker.
Yeah, Summer Walker. That's exactly what I was thinking of. Yeah, like Summer Walker like has that of where, you know, she puts out good music, she's really good at what she does, but then doesn't like to be out front because it causes her so much social anxiety, right? Like she doesn't want to perform. If she could just make music and not have to tour, she was like, she'd be fantastic. But the thing is, you know, it's those two things aren't kind of divested of each other, that, you know, when you do good work, people will notice. And, you know, like when my clients, you know, kind of with the imposter syndrome stuff, like what I tell them is like, well, then just don't do a good job. And then nobody will notice you at all. You will not get promoted. But they're like, why can't I stop doing that? It's like, well, if you do a good job, then you got to also be okay with the fact that, you know, people are going to want to elevate you and put you out front. It's just the way it works. You know, I mean, I don't get to buy a Ferrari and then be mad about the fact that it gets shitty gas mileage. Like, yo, it comes with the car, man. Like, you know, if you're buying something for the gas mileage, then get you an electric, you know, get a hybrid, do something different. But if you bought a Ferrari, own that, you know?
And Jeeps don't get good gas mileage.
Oh, well, SUVs in general. I mean, yeah, if you have one of those cars like that, like, you be okay with the fact that it doesn't get good gas mileage. And if you're in California, or especially Southern California, LA, hey, you burn it through it.
I remember being on like a long flight, and I got to see the documentaries for Whitney Houston and Alexander McQueen. And something that I took from seeing both of those documentaries is that, or my assessment is that if they could have used their gift and not been famous, they would still be here. Because like with Alexander McQueen being a fashion designer, it's like you have to get famous to be successful. And so his first two lines were kind of under the radar, but then I think his third line did well, but it was like, now you have to produce because you're in this limelight. And then with Whitney Houston, I just feel like
produce, that's pressure.
And then I feel like with Whitney Houston, she just was a product of her time where, you know, she's from New Jersey, she could. And so we, you know, on the surface, we think like Bobby did all this to her. And it's like, nah, she was like, better. But she was marketed as this princess. And so it was like, I feel like it's similar to kind of what Beyonce did, where she was kind of marketed at first, and then when she came out with that one album where everybody was like, "What is this music?" And it's like, this is the real her, probably.
Right,
And she's been trying to be fake. She had to be fake because of the industry, and I feel like that's what happened to Whitney Houston, where she had to be this fake princess, like good girl, and I feel like maybe that was her demise.
It was overwhelming. It was just too much to kind of uphold for an extended period of time. It wasn't sustainable, essentially, is what it became. Right. And then not having the opportunity or ability to pivot into something different. And so, you know, the world can be unforgiving in that way of like, you know, we typecast you, so to speak. This is what you do. This is what you will always do. And it's like, well, you know, you need somebody to push back against that, or the opportunity not. So I commend people who are saying like, no, I'm not going to let you or allow you, world, to box me in and make me this. That like, hey, what I do is, you know, I'm going to move, shift, and create in a way that's authentic to me, not just what you think I need to be doing or should be doing.
And then there's the idea of, you know, I think it's the Gorillas, who are like an animated band. And then there's like these new 3D like models, like where they're like CG supermodels or something like that. There's like one that just got signed a couple years ago to a contract.
It's not even a real person?
Right. But they have like an Instagram. They have an Instagram and everything. And so I was like, that might be a way for certain part of the population to like use their gift.
Right.
Like particularly with the Gorillas, where they could share their music, but nobody knows what they look like. So
yeah. I feel like is it Daft? It's not Daft. It's the
mouse head dude.
Yeah. Is that it?
It's like MAU5, or I don't know. There's like this dude who, and you know, Sia, she had the little thing for the longest.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So I mean, it's like, you know, the anonymity saves me from having to adhere or fit in that box. Like I give you what I want, and so it's like the artist taking the control back and saying, I'm not going to allow you to define me and control my narrative or my life. I'm going to be able to walk around, go into Whole Foods or Trader Joe's or however, and you're not going to stop me from that because you have no idea who I am.
Is Daft Punk the one with the helmet?
I think so. Yeah, I think that's Daft Punk with the helmet. Yeah.
Yeah. So ideas for the people. I mean,
walk around in the helmet. No, I don't think you should have to be masked on all the time.
Somebody in the audience was like, "Yes."
Mask
off. So when starting a new job, how can we prevent our imposter syndrome from going into our overdrive? So like, I remember being a manager at a previous position, and there was so we had like 2 projects that I would manage, and most of the people on this newer project had started with the first project. And so they like, once this second project closed, they just went back to the first project. But there was one guy who, when he got hired, he started on that project. So when he came back to the first, well, he didn't come back, but when he transitioned to the first project, he had this like he had to do it right. And I'm just like, but you've never done it before. Just because you've worked at this company for this many years doesn't mean you've never done this project. So why do you feel like it was like he was getting upset with himself?
Yep. And so a lot of that is that pressure that we put on ourselves. And so like, you know, I'm really big on language and how people talk to themselves. And oftentimes that inner narrative that we have is really demanding. So it says, I have to, I should, I need to, I must, right? And so Albert Ellis called it masturbatory behavior, right? And so it's putting this pressure on ourselves to always have to be something. And so I think one thing is to set appropriate kind of expectations into our, kind of into new endeavors, right? So that like, you've not done this thing before, how good or how appropriate is it for you to have very high expectations for you to do something you've never done before to be perfect at it? Like, I think that's really inappropriate. Like, I mean, regardless of how much you've seen something or watched something or doing something similar to it, that doesn't mean it's still a new thing. Like an example might be, I like to ride bikes, right? Like, so I have a bicycle, I have a couple, and I like to cycle a lot, right? Motorcycle looks like a bigger version of a bicycle. I cannot ride a motorcycle. I have not ever ridden one. I have no desire to, but also I don't know that I should be, you rode bikes, so you should be able to do this well too. Not necessarily, right? Like they're different mechanics. And so could I pick it up easier maybe than somebody who's not have any familiarity with bikes or anything? Maybe, but also, I shouldn't have that expectation. But then there's also, again, that pressure that I need to do things well all the time, regardless of what it is. So that if I've had success here, then I should have success there. And I don't know that that's a really good way to have that kind of syllogistic reasoning or thinking that because if this, then this, it's like, well, if this is true here, but it may not be true here. But what we can say is that the tools or things that usually made you successful in one area can translate to make you successful in other areas. So that, like, if you're a person that does research, or if you're a person that is able to look at somebody else and get that learning, or that you're a fast learner, then those things will be applicable in other areas. So that, like, you driving a car, you're like, oh, I picked that up easy. And, I understand that when people teach this way, or if I watch somebody drive, I can pick it up. Then maybe the same would be true when you're trying to learn how to fly a plane. Right. And so, like, kind of saying, hey, I've got these strengths and I will use these strengths to be successful in this new space.
Yeah, for me, motorcycle, like the whole no sides thing is kind of off-putting. Like,
no bumpers. It's just you and the road, right?
Immediately.
Yeah. There's the ground, and it's moving fast.
Yeah, and as far as, like, something people don't think about when they're, like, new to a job is, like, there's a window where you can ask as many questions as you want. I mean, you don't know when that window ends, but when you get there, they expect you to be dumb.
Right.
So don't extend that window too far, but you can ask as many questions as you want in a certain period of time.
Yeah, and that if they're also, if that's not the case and they're expecting you to already know it, it's like, well, where'd that come from? Right? Was that an appropriate expectation to put on me? I'm all about people saying, putting appropriate expectations on themselves, but also not allowing others to put inappropriate expectations on them. So that, hey, you guys hired me to already know how to do this job. Like, where was that in I told you in the interview that I didn't know, like, I told you I hadn't done this. Like, we were aware. At what point did that change? And so kind of having that discussion of, like, hey, I feel like you guys are, unfairly judging me on my, kind of growth and trajectory in this moment.
Yeah, that expectation from others is big in relationships, but we're not here to talk about that.
It's going down.
I got a testimony. So my last question is just about, self-sabotage. How can we, what is, I don't know if we might have talked about what that is, but how can we prevent ourselves from a form of self-sabotage?
So yeah, I think a part of it is, again, having that confidence and trust in self to be able to go into new spaces and do well, because ideally, or essentially, most people have been able to do that, right? Like, I mean, nobody's known everything since the day they were born. So at some point you learned something new and you were able to do well enough to continue to move on, whether that was an education or, learning how to ride a bike or, graduating to a motorcycle or whatever. You've learned new things. So kind of giving yourself credit for that. But also kind of monitoring that fear. So, like, that fear that you're telling yourself, what is your inner bully telling you about your ability to move forward in the future and accomplish things in the future, and be really clear about the fact that, like, is that based in evidence, or is that just the inner bully saying something? Because our inner bully will present stuff to us that's not true, and then we'll try to use, tangibly, like, associate to some information and use that to suggest a negative future, and it's not really based in intangible kind of evidence. So, don't allow yourself to be talked out of doing things because you told yourself, or your inner beliefs told you, that you won't be successful. I had a friend who worked, who was applying to Harvard for graduate school. And so, they, like, they go around the country and, like, they'll have representatives come out and do kind of, recruitment or whatever. And so he went up and, he kind of was talking to the recruiter and kind of telling him the situation. And the recruiter said, 100% of the people who don't apply to Harvard don't get in. And so, he's sending the message of, like, hey, like, a lot of people are self-selecting out, and they would have been okay and done well at our university, but because they tell themselves, I don't have what it takes, or Harvard's this, and I came from this school and Harvard's up here, that I won't be able to be successful. And it's like, well, yeah, if you don't apply or you self-select out, you won't. but give yourself an opportunity to do so.
Yeah, that's a big thing in a previous position where you understand that you're a minority. Like I'm a Black person, I'm a woman. So there's sometimes, depending on how you were treated at the beginning, is how you decide to operate. And so I would, advocate for myself less. But then sometimes I would like confront my supervisor about something, and he'd just be like, "Oh, okay." And I'm just like, so how much of me thinking that they were treating me like a Black woman, and it just wasn't, I just didn't communicate.
Right. How much of it was something the other person was doing, or was it me? Exactly.
And I was like, oh man, I've been struggling. And what percentage is this? Because they are actually racist and sexist, but
But maybe not so racist and sexist that they would have not done anything, right? Like, there's degrees of racist and sexist. Like not every racist is a Klan member.
Right. And just to round it out, like at some point during this conversation, I had this thought, but then I forgot it so that's why I wrote it down. But there's like power, and maybe this is like from meditation. I read a lot, so maybe this is from meditation or something. But like, there's power in this state of being instead of actually doing. So earlier you mentioned like not having to do things to make it seem like you're a better person, but the idea of like, if you just exist, if you just get to the mindset that your existence is enough, then whatever you do won't have that much power over you.
Right. So that you aren't looking to your next accomplishment to define who you are, right? Because what happens then is that, and you will see this in people that struggle with imposter syndrome, is that they're constantly they don't live in their success, right? So it's like, I did this thing, I didn't celebrate it. And so now I'm like, what's the next thing that's on the line? It's like, well, I don't want to get complacent. And they try to tell themselves like, I don't want to get stuck or be mediocre. And it's like, well, that's not who you've ever been. And we look at your history, why are you not just saying, hey, I did this good thing? Like, sure, you're going to go on and do something else that's good, and you're going to set more goals, but why can't you celebrate the goal you've just accomplished? And so part of it, I think, is this twisted kind of definition of humility that people have, right? Like being humble says that, like, I can't talk about anything good that I do. And to me, that's false. I feel like, humility is like not making people feel less than for that you accomplish, right? And so that's being humble. It's like, I did this, like, you scored 50 points, you did that, right? Like, I don't know that you need to say, I can't talk about the 50 points I scored because make people feel bad. It's like, talk about your 50 points and also say, hey, people are good basketball players too. That doesn't mean I'm the best or whatever, but I did on tonight. I was out there getting mine in, and that's okay. Yeah, and celebrate that.
So do you have any exercises for, because I don't know what percent of people actually celebrate their successes. So do you have any exercises for doing that more?
For sure. So two things. I have people create an evidence sheet. So this is a sheet, just list of things that kind of counter what your inner bully says. And usually those are like accomplishments or things you've done. And so kind of putting that list out. And then the other thing is like a gratitude journal, right? Like I like people to kind of engage in an activity where they're actually saying, here's the thing I did, and here's how I'm going to kind of congratulate or show myself gratitude for doing this thing. And it doesn't have to be, again, I graduated college as valedictorian or something. It's, hey, you know what? I got through this semester and I passed all my classes. Okay, give yourself gratitude for that, right? Because that's not a guarantee. There's no guarantee that there's some people that go through the semester, they don't pass all their classes. I've met them before. Like, that's the thing. It happens. So don't like minimize the fact that you were able to accomplish something as routine. You did that for you. It doesn't matter if, 90% of the people did it as well. You did it. And so be okay with that and give yourself some credit and gratitude for that.
So I would really like to thank you for coming on my channel and dropping gems and knowledge. So how can people follow you or get in touch with you if they're interested?
For sure. So my website, StevonLewis.com. If you Google Stevon Lewis, I come up. That's by design, right? Like doing enough stuff out in the space in the digital footprint. And I'm really active on Instagram. So at Stevon Lewis MFT, letters Mary Frances Thomas. I'm putting up stuff and information out and little tidbits of stuff that I do maybe in therapy. I might do like a post or a caption on a concept. And just kind of letting people know what I'm doing just in these different spaces.
All right, thank you. And for everyone out there, I would like you to like so I know it's real, comment and tell me how you feel, subscribe to Seal the Deal, and sign up for post notifications to show your zeal. And I'll see you in the next video. Peace.